Welcome to a new era, the Bingo Book. The anticipated Bingo Book, featuring the burst weapons, the LD weapons, the Lufenia armor, Lufenia orb, all the new stuff, new characters, new sets of weapon rates, EXs. Oh my god, they're gonna be dropping like hotcakes off of a truck that you left open that you probably should have had closed driving down the street. All the off banners are gone. The 15 CP rate has dropped. The LD rate is at the old rate of EXs. Thankfully, getting a burst from a ticket is almost impossible, but you know, some people tend to pull it off. Not gonna point to any people, but generally what you want to do is focus on getting not the burst, but the LD. The burst definitely helps. I'm not gonna deny that, but at this current moment, it's not a necessity. Focus on getting the LDs and you're good for about 2 weeks on everything else because that set character is going to be synergy. In the distant future, there will be LD extensions that make a lot of the early LDs and, you know, some protagonist favorites stronger with double HP hits and increased brave potency. So don't count out any LDs. It's good to get them all. Especially for certain challenges, I would highly recommend not skipping any LDs. Most notably, the Odin challenge. Generally, what you need is 3 synergy characters, fulfill the actions, HP, and get the score, which is generally pretty low, so is not too much to worry about. As for this Mog Pass, we get increased points to summon boards, character board points, and wild points. There are 2 different versions. You got the Whale Pass, and you got the affordable one. The only difference between the 2 is with the Whale Pass, you get a little bit extra. You get these 2 tokens, which equate to about 10 burst tokens, which is the goal of all these challenge quests. Now, once you get 50 of these tokens, you can then pick any burst of your choice. Doesn't matter if it's previously been out, it's current, it's available to you if you have the tokens. Once Lufenia hits, we will have the ability to achieve even stronger armor that will increase our damage, let us break the damage cap. It varies from person to person. It's usually you can exceed 99k on your brave, or you can exceed 100,000 on the HP damage scale. It really depends. I would not recommend getting too many of these, especially if the effects are the same and you're running them on the same team, because it seems like a waste. But don't worry, not too bad, is it? I mean, it can be for certain people, but I have plenty of characters built because, you know, I don't depend on RNA for every single fight. I love team compositions and talk about them entirely too much. So of course, I'm gonna be prepared. It's good to not forget a lot of the characters that put us here. I mean, when I did the FEOD rush, look, I was exhausted. 20+ hours, no sleep, got on stream, died a few times. Now, if I can sit there and do that, then anybody is capable of making good teams. Trust me. Now you see, using multiple characters.
Where's my apologems?
Stop it.
I want a free burst.
Stop it.
Stupid content creators and JP players always be getting everything.
No, you. Imagine that, starting a fight in which you had no chance of winning. That's been a lesson by Dr. Balthier, PhD in common sense. Again, no you. Once level 80 hits, we'll be getting calls, which will use LD and a regular skill, bringing the character on the field to attack. Now this is going to make a lot of characters without LDs very useful because they're gonna be getting level 80 pretty early. This is why I'm saying you got to build your characters. Don't leave them in the dust because I want an LD first. That is the stupidest thing you could possibly say at any given point in this game. These characters are very special. I'm gonna have all of them on the screen on purpose so you can see that these can carry a team if you use them correctly. Especially in Lufenia, you can still get away with a few of them, I'm not saying it's gonna be easy, but you can still do it. Do I recommend it? No. But I'm saying if you got extra characters available, you should use them. Don't always depend on the same ones over and over. It's bad practice. It really doesn't help. All it does is make you a worse player. Now, when you get to the point where you can play with whatever you want, okay, then it doesn't really matter. But if you're trying to grow, just don't bring Arden to every single fight because it doesn't help. Not in the slightest. Now, I'm about to get into a lot of the LDs. Garland gets 5 stacks right away, followed by a brand new buff that gives him 2 turns of nice delays, followed by a free ability. The overhead buff, on the other hand, drops defense and speed based on its stacks, and it can go up to 5, and it increases every time you hit the target. Looking like a nice good mini delay king to me. Now, Jack's LD is very unique because of his debuff. It increases stacks by 1 every time you hit the target, specializing in taking down defense and increasing brave damage to target. So even characters, I don't know, such as like Waka's a light EX, can do some serious damage. We're talking numbers, big numbers. Now, speaking of numbers, if you ever get hit with any big numbers, all Bosch has to do is pop his LD, and he instantly gains what I call the Bosch factor. If his life drops below half, he instantly heals up to half. So in English, he cannot die. He's basically immortal, so long as that buff is present, that is. The second it goes off, that's it for him. Now, we're talking about some damage, taking hits. Who's actually taking hits? Because if you hit 8, oh my god, he's coming back with a counter. Not just a counter on top of a counter, doing too much damage. Can that be measured on the counter? Because it should be. Look at all this, he just comes in with the kicks, follow up, double hopscotch, boom, coming down like Gao. Because Gao specializes in Earth Imperil, Earth Enchant, and he heals the team. People are gonna be like, but Gao sucks. Gao can heal and Gao can counter. And he can imperil Earth. How many people can do that? Honestly speaking, I would recommend to not sleep on any of these characters, such as Kamari, who has always been slept on. He can increase your initial brave, attack, HP regen, and brave regen with his own buff, followed by massive battery to the team and heals. The face of Crystal Chronicles himself has finally stopped dropping, no pun intended, stacks. I know he was carrying a lot of weight because the chalice is literally above his head. That's a nice little reference if you played the game. But anyways, he's not gonna drop stacks as long as his buff is up from his LD, which makes him actually playable. Beatrix with the bag of tricks that depletes buffs from enemies faster than missing seasons on Netflix. I'm looking at you, Naruto. But anyways, once she drops the debuff from her LD, her following attacks will then trigger a nice follow-up that dispels 1 buff from the target. The initial LD attack dispels all buffs from the target. Once this debuff is on, you're set. You have follow-ups, her damage is actually maximized, you got a tank that's doing damage, you have HP regeneration to the team, battery from the HP damage dealt. Come on, perfect. Renoa's LD turns her attacks to magic, grants the party brave regen, HP regen, puts on Angelo Cannon buff. She turns into a true supporter Noah. No pun intended, but that's basically what she is. She turns into a support. If you try to use her LD while Angel Wings is up, it will cancel it. So generally what you want to do is you want to go LD into Angel Wings and then put it back up when you really need it, or just play support with Renoa like I do, cause it's really effective. Cam gives brave regen to the party, overflow limit up, and he's actually doing damage. Wow, what a surprise. Hope, on the other hand, is the first magic imperil in the game. Now this can be a double-edged sword when using his call, because he will come out with the shell and the protect, and he might push some things off that you could possibly need. So I don't know, maybe the Imperil is worth it, maybe it's not. It depends. Kryl has Thunder Enchant and places a bomb on the opponent that will then detonate the second they try to move, following up with a glorious stun. Arciela gives increased HP damage dealt to targets, prevents Brave Gain, and also recovers skill 2. Yes indeed. X-Death LD depletes all enemy Brave to 0 while giving him a nice free ability and maxing out his debuff stacks. Now DKC, don't play around with this guy. He gets a massive delay off his LD, dropping Dark Imperil, increase HP damage dealt to target, allowing him to get an instant launch the next turn. Oh yes, Caius, one of my favorite LDs. He triggers a re-break with his LD on the target if they're inflicted with doom, and gets a free ability afterwards. Penelo removes debuffs from the party, grants overflow limit up, and turns her buffs into framed buffs every time you use them, as long as the LD's up. Now that's what I'm talking about. Emperor's LD is a nice multi-hit extravaganza that follows up with tornadoes that will then delay the attack target, then transforming his HP attack into a trigger for all his bombs. Finally, Machina hits extremely hard, and he gets a follow-up after using his LD as long as his debuff is placed on the target. He's averaging nearly 200k a turn with a free ability afterwards, man. Kais recovers Brave to the party based on launch damage, and he saps. Characters that were released with an LD only were released with an LD only for a good reason, because their kits are a little too strong. These are going to be the saviors of Lufenia, the ultimate cheese that you need to counter with other cheese. These are some serious legends. Some of them can be banned. Some of them can be used. But you should do both because they're awesome. We got Reno with the increased Brave damage to target, and Thunder Imperil rolled into one framed debuff followed by his LD debuff, which negates Brave damage. It has no duration. It will stay on the bosses until they decide to attack you. And once they do, bam, nothing but big fat zeros. But let me tell you something. Look, pound for pound, no matter what anybody says, Rude is the strongest character in the game without a burst. He is way too versatile. His auras, max Brave up, attack up. He can reduce Brave damage to the party, massive heals, massive batteries. His battery scales off of his healing. His Brave potency is literally through the roof, has an incredibly multi-hit extravaganza EX, and he never runs out of steam. He can literally keep going for days and days. Speaking of going on for days, guy is he just keeps attacking, but I'm not really seeing the damage output. It's kind of weird though, right? Well, he's not really meant for that. He's a kind of healy tank support that enchants Earth and imperils Earth, unlike Gao, who only imperils Earth, but he enchants himself. Guy can enchant the entire team, so you have to figure out, okay, am I gonna need him in this situation in which I need an enchanter with Earth and imperil with Earth and some healing and tankiness? Last but not least, he reduces a decent amount of HP damage to the party. But speaking of damage, oh, Kurosami's not reducing nothing, he's dealing it all out. Massive damage, nothing but damage, increased HP damage to the target. He was actually one of the go-tos for a lot of the stupid Lufenias. Because of the Brave reduction, that didn't matter because he just went right through it with increased HP damage to the targets. We're talking drive-by levels of damage. He also triggers an ice trap after his EX every single time he attacks. Good AoE, good single target, can't be stopped. Zand has increased splash damage to targets. He specializes in fire, dark, and earth while giving dark enchant to the party. His LD can actually trigger a re-break. It's just mind-boggling. But not as mind-boggling as physically deleting turns. Now listen up, there is a difference between deleting turns and delaying turns. Deleting turns physically removes the turn. So for instance, if the boss had 2 turns back to back and you deleted one, it's still gonna hit you with the other one. If you delayed them, then you're gonna move both turns back at the same time. Got it memorized? Edward actually benefits off of being a coward because he can hide and increase his evasion rate, as well as battering the team, obviously, because he is a nice support. His stackable debuff actually prevents Brave gain at maximum stacks. Now it's like, why would I want to even care about Edward? Look, he can literally put the enemies to sleep. Don't worry, it is balanced. Every time they get hit, the duration drops by 1. Every time their turn comes up, the duration drops by 1. Once they get up, they get delayed by 1. You know, just nothing like beating the enemies while they're physically sleeping. It will come in handy. Back to what I was getting at with, you know, the damage stuff. Strago specializes in dual cast. He only gets it for 2 turns from his LD and his skill 2. He can get a little leverage from his C65, but that's only for emergencies. So every one of his skills is gonna be 100% AoE, attacking twice. So if that's something that people care about, which you probably should, I actually did call him bait and I still stand by that, but every character in this era is good. You can't ignore them, they are actually good characters. It depends on when you want to use them and how you want to use them to get their effectiveness. 9 is a bit strange. He heals and can negate HP damage to the party for 1 turn with his LD. He puts on a massive shield that actually rivals Warrior of Light, surprisingly enough. Let's just say he's a tanky heal kinda damage person. They tried to do everything with this guy. I guess he's a good middle ground if you're missing something on the team. Theodore is absolutely broken. He is literally what Paladin and Rosa would be put together, ironically because he is their child. He benefits off of high risk reward gameplay due to his awakening buff. If that thing goes off, you lose 80% of your life. To get the maximum effects from his EX, you need to have the party at full HP, and his LD cleanses debuffs while healing and battering the team. Look man, Gladio is, you know what, I'm gonna give him the name Lufenia Cheese. He is a counter tank that batteries the party and reduces HP damage and has the ability to not take any Brave damage or HP damage. Depending on how you set up, of course, because he has X amount of LD uses. Basically, the entire gameplay for Gladio is gonna be, I press my skills, I sit here and let you attack me, then I counter you and break you, and within 10 turns, the match is basically over. He was actually an answer to a lot of the stupid Lufenias that incorporated DPS racing, and I had to do it the hard way because I didn't pick him and ignored this. Ah yes, the high school janitor, Desh himself, enchant and imperil thunder, heals the team. Also, there is one thing that we need to talk about. When he first dropped, his debuff on his LD was framed, and that is a 50-50 chance to get a paralysis. Now, later on, they did remove this, which kinda got people a little mad, so just a heads up, it was an accident. He was never supposed to have this, according to Square Enix. This only occurs once the enemy decides to hit you. You're gonna see either a 1-turn stun or a 1-turn defense drop. I know, it's kind of RNG. I came up with a small system to display the overall contributions of each character individually. Now, on the left, we have a grid that is divided into 3 columns that caps at 30 points. On the right, we got 6 categories that cap at 5 each, and it will correspond to the grid's columns. Now, Penelo, the turns, the auras, controls, we already know what it is. They're good. Her attack and tank has always been garbage. Now, let me explain this kill section. The ability to kill something. Her ability to kill stuff is super low. It's only attitude because she has an EX that comes up very quickly. Otherwise, that would definitely be a 1. Now, in the case of Rude, aka Mr. Clean, his kill potential, his auras, his attack, the tankiness he can provide, he's just so good in so many areas. But even though Penelo's points are generally lower than Rude's, does not mean that Rude is going to be better than Penelo in every single situation, because they can do different things. That's the point of this. Characters do different things. Even though a character has higher stats than another character, doesn't mean they're gonna be better than them in every single situation. That's the whole point of this chart. Now, if Lightning was going up against a Thunder Absorb boss, she's dropping to a 3 from a 23. But Penelo's gonna be fine. Rude's gonna be fine, right? You gotta understand what you're going up against, and that results may vary. But at a base level, that's what this is. Ah yes, we have finally arrived at the burst units. The burst units will be protagonists and antagonists only, so everybody else is only getting an LD. Now, as for burst effects, they're generally increased brave damage, increased HP damage, brave regen, crit. Just general damage output and regeneration is what they offer, but there are a few that have some special effects. Now, those are the ones you really want to watch out for because they can turn the tides of fights very easily, depending on what you have set up, of course. Let's use the first Lufenia as an example. The first Lufenia, it was Shinryu, and it was very interesting because I didn't know what was going on. I was like, what is this purple orb over his head? Honestly, it had nothing to do with the fight. It was the first one. It wasn't really done very well, but the fight itself, I liked. He was constantly shifting auras. There was a point in which I couldn't delay him, I couldn't battery, so you know what I did? I was like, okay, it's time to bring Noctis Burst. Because if I can just lock him into one aura and then just go in, I'll be fine. That's all I need to do is go as many times as possible. Noctis's LD gives each party member, including himself, 2 turns of no action consumption. Now you know what this means, right? You can go as many times as you want. You can break them and then go. You can then pop the LD and then continue to go. Now I'm telling you right now, this is one of the most versatile bursts in general. And a lot of people want this because you can go as many times as you want and completely shut down a lot of Lufenia bosses before they get started, depending on what the orb is. Now for Noctis's burst effect itself, what it is going to do is deliver a nice follow-up every time somebody attacks. Yes, I said every time somebody attacks, there will be a follow-up. Doesn't matter who it is. As for Squall, I'm gonna say he's better against multiple targets, at least until he gets his LD extension boards, which makes him a god. But his effect is increased AoE damage. Now Vaughn, this guy, let's get into his LD. His problem has been completely fixed. It's like he just keeps running out of abilities. Well, guess what? He doesn't run out of abilities for 3 turns. That's right, it's all free abilities for 3 turns once you hit his LD. So that's all his burst is spamming White Whirl back to back to get maximum damage output. Now, he is strictly single target and he does get axed out of like 90% of the fights in the game. I gotta put that out there right now before anyone decides to go after this guy. Kefka is very interesting yet very simple, but also very cheese. His LD turns all of his debuffs that he placed on the enemies to framed debuffs. This can be a good thing and a bad thing because you can lock yourself out of putting other debuffs on, which is gonna be really bad in certain areas, but also really good in other areas. Now, once Kefka gets done with his burst, he gives increased HP damage to the party for, what was it, 4 turns? I mean, it's nothing crazy, but it does help. It definitely helps since all of his stuff is split until you get to his EX and his LD, which are not really falling in that category. His LD is 100% AoE. We know his EX has really good splash damage. It comes up rather quickly. He's got the Meteor, so you can technically lock down a boss and they will never hurt you the entire match. And to make matters even worse, now he has damage to go with that. I picked him in certain situations, but definitely not all of them. Good old Captain America. Now his LD reduces HP damage based on his shield amount, which means 99.9% of the time, you're not really going to be taking any type of damage. Now once his burst effect goes up, you get 8 turns of Brave Regen. Kinda basic, but good. Oh yes, Lightning, the pampered one. One is her favorite word because all she does is attack one target. Her LD generally hits about 200k because it gives her increased HP damage, on top of putting Thunder in peril, and 3 free turns with free abilities, which gives you a free EX setup. Now let's get into her burst effect. Her burst effect is the most broken in the game so far. I honestly think this needs to be nerfed because it lasts for 10 turns. She has 50% increased Brave damage. Brave overflow limit up. Increased Brave damage when attacking a broken target or breaking a target. Increased HP damage when breaking a target or attacking a broken target. And Brave limit up. So she's always going to be capping on top of already doing too much as it is. For 10 turns. Ultemicia, her LD finally fixes her problem. It gives her 5 stacks right off the bat, which allows her to actually use skills and not waste them. Now her burst effect is very interesting. It's one of those unique ones. Every turn she attacks, with the duration of her burst effect on, she will delete turns. Oh yeah! Now Sephiroth, his LD is weird. It's increased Brave damage to target and sap, but doesn't really do anything for him. I'm gonna say the burst this time is actually better than his LD because his burst effect is really trolly. It resets all the enemies' Brave to 1, no matter what the situation, for a few turns. So you can set up some infinite break loops if that's what you feel like doing or if the situation calls for it. Ramza's LD increases the party's initial Brave and overflow limit, as well as restoring the party's Brave based on initial Brave. Isn't that fantastic? And the funny thing is, his burst effect actually scales initial Brave, max Brave, and attack based on the amount of total active buffs on the party. Now that's kinda gimmicky. I say it's better to have a party full of buffs if you really want to play Ramza to his maximum potential. Cloud's LD just delays until he gets LD boards, which will give him an overhead buff that increases his damage. Now as for the burst effect itself, Brave damage increase, critical Brave damage increase, Brave overflow limit up, that type of generic stuff. Now Onion Boy's got a really interesting LD. It is a turn swap AoE attack into a free ability usage. Now as for his burst effect, it lasts for 6 turns and it increases Brave damage dealt, you know, overflow limit up, HP damage up. It's one of those with kind of the generic effects, but he's still very good to use, except if you're using his ninja as the burst. because it's only single target, and generally Sage is just better to use as the burst versus the ninja. Furion's LD delivers an attack followed by a debuff that triggers a counterattack that will then do a lot of damage and then heal the team. As for the burst effect itself, you get a 50% increase to max Brave. You get a massive amount of Brave recovery. You also recover Brave based on damage dealt only once per turn though. So he is basically a god for healing teams or just any type of counter team with the best animation in the game. Arden specializes in being dead. He sets his life to 0 with his LD, which then allows him to not die because he has no life to lose. The way you start with Arden is by popping his skill 1 twice in order to max out his Fedora stacks, which makes him very strong. That's all you need to know, is you want Arden to be very strong. Do not, under any circumstances, go into LD without maximum Fedora stacks. Now, all of your abilities will do a follow-up. That is what he does. He's similar to Noctis, you know, the sword tossing and catching and hitting in front of people type thing that looks very flashy to an extent. That's what he does. Skill 1, 2, LD, and EX, all of this will trigger. Now his EX actually triggers an instant break that can also re-break targets. Now, what you really want to focus on is damage. That's all it is. Just keep throwing the sword, keep doing damage. That's all he does is damage, more damage, because that's all he's good for is damage. Except for his burst effect, which gives you an 8-turn Brave regen effect. Kuja's LD is kind of special. It did more damage than we were expecting, you know, like the 300 to 400k plus and even beyond that, while enchanting the party with Holy, which is also what his burst effect does. Enchant the party with Holy and gives increased Brave damage dealt by 50%. Shantoto's LD is an 100% AoE stun and 100% defense drop, but her burst on the other hand is splash damage and gives 5 turns of increased elemental weakness damage and some overflow limit. His LD imperils Holy, gives increased Brave damage to targets, and he literally does everything else. As for his burst, it increases Brave damage dealt, overflow limit up, restores HP, and you get your Brave restored by 100% of your current HP at the start of every turn. He's getting a 28 on my little chart. And that concludes everything for a year's worth of information. I'm very proud of myself. This was my favorite Bing.
Stupid GP players and content creators, I just pitied my first burst. Just wait till I get back to my Facebook group and we're gonna type more stupid. Stupid GP players overhype everything and I still never get mine.
You can't read the trash.